My name is Joseph Schofer. I'm a professor of civil environmental engineering at Northwestern, have been for 43 years, a long time, and I'm also associate dean for faculty affairs at the McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Science. My affiliation with Hillel is that I served on the board for a long time. And the records were destroyed in a courthouse fire. I don't really know when I started, but it was a lot of years. And for some of those years, I was the chairman of the board. This was in relatively early days of Hillel, but not 80 years early days, but 30 years ago or something like that, when Hillel was not a fraction of what it is today. It was a very small organization with a very small staff and an even smaller board. And at that point in time, I think I ended up being the chairman of the board for a while because it was a task that was pushed around from one person to another, and I was in the way. I think a characteristic of graduate work, at least the experience I had, was that was a full-time job, and there wasn't anything else much going on in my life. I had a much stronger connection as an undergraduate at a different university to Hillel, which really linked me to the organization here, and that link developed when I was a faculty member, because it would seem that was an opportunity not just to take from Hillel, but to give back to Hillel. So I was on the board for a long time, to be a supporter, to be involved in some of the, if you will, tactical skirmishes, because there were certainly people on campus who were not particularly friendly to or supportive of the Jews. I wouldn't say it was a high conflict situation, but it was a really kind of an important conflict to be involved in. I developed a relationship with Michael Belinsky, who was the rabbi then. There was a different rabbi when I was a graduate student who was rather harder to build a relationship with. Michael is... Everybody knows Michael. He's a very different kind of person. He's a magnetic guy. And it was interesting and fun to work with him. And one of the things I discovered was that serving on the board of Hillel was not only a way to make a contribution to Jewish life for students, but also to connect with Jewish faculty. And this is a very interesting institution, I think, in terms of its Jewish faculty. Probably not radically different than a lot of other private, high-quality institutions. In that Northwestern went through a period of time when Jews were not particularly welcome. They're really not welcome at all. It wasn't something that I experienced. It was something that, in fact, people that went before me experienced. People that I've talked to experienced very, very senior faculty who are sadly long gone, who talked to me about that. And what I found was that Hillel was a way to connect with a really strong group of Jewish faculty across the campus. And I've had a lot of connections with those people. I've certainly learned a lot from them. One of the things I discovered was that when there was an important issue to be decided, my experience was that people very consistently called on the Jewish faculty because they had a lot of confidence in them. So when there was a search committee for the president, when there was a large policy issue to be addressed, and some kind of ad hoc temporary faculty committee was assembled, or when there were elections among the faculty to select people for high-level committees, the Jewish faculty were always called out. It was certainly a source of pride for me, but it also reminded me that there really is a strong network of very high-quality Jewish faculty, or people who maybe aren't particularly Jewish on a day-to-day basis, but when the need and the opportunity arises, there are people who stepped up. First of all, we've had a really strong wave of Jewish faculty across the campus, and of course Jewish students. And the schools broke the line on this. And somebody woke up one day and said, if you really want good people, you can't discriminate this way. It really doesn't make any sense. I think the fraction of Jewish faculty is probably down now because other minority groups have really come into play and are particularly important on our campus. But one of the things that I find really encouraging, heartwarming, is that look at the series of presidents that we've had. We've had 3 Jewish presidents in a row of various degrees of kind of openness in terms of their Jewish identity. I think clearly the Jewish community here is really strong. Clearly Hillel is really strong. And I look at this building, and I was on the board when this building was designed and when this building was built, and one could say, well, this building kind of defines Hillel, and the reality is Hillel defines this building. It's because Hillel was what it was and was becoming what it is now that made it possible to gather resources together to get the support from the university, from the Federation, to build this building. Yeah, it's probably a silly way to say it, but the Jewish community at Northwestern is normal now. And if you think back 50 years, if we think back 50 years and more than 50 years, when there were quotas and there were restrictions on Jewish access to this institution of higher learning, that was abnormal, and what you see now is very normal. Are we mainstream in the university? Of course, but we shouldn't even talk that way. Why wouldn't we be? That's the nature of the institution. It's the nature of this community, the strength of the people, and the cohesiveness of the people as well. Well, because if I think back 50 years, and it was 50 years ago that I graduated from college, Hillel was a tiny little island in the sea of the university, and in order to maintain its identity, what Hillel did was it did Jewish, and what Hillel is now, I find this kind of hard to explain to people in my cohort who haven't been in touch with the university, is Hillel is a bazaar. It's a collection of dozens of activities that are generated by students and supported by the organization. So the diversity of activities here is extraordinary. If you go back in history, there wasn't that diversity. The focus was on, I'm going to do stuff that's Jewish. So it was much more of a religious organization, celebrate the holidays, than celebrate the diversity that is within the Jewish community. So things happen here that 50 years ago you wouldn't imagine would happen, because it wasn't quite as aggressive as I'm making it sound, but you were kind of manning the ramparts. You really needed to protect this core Jewish identity. I don't think that's the issue now. I think the issue is expression and opportunity. Well, we talked about Jirenu, the a cappella group. A cappella groups have become hot on university campuses in the last decade. And one might say, well, why is there a need for a Jewish one? And I guess the answer is, well, why not? Why not anything and everything? The theater group, the theater ensemble, the publications. What's the humor magazine? Schmooze, yes. All of these things are grassroots activities that popped up in an environment where there's a million other things going on. People didn't particularly need to come to Hillel to make this happen, but Hillel was a venue where people could innovate. They could start their own, if you will, business, and a lot of those businesses have survived and have thrived. It's a very, very different environment. And I guess I would stick to the definition of it being a bazaar. I think it's important. I think we're all interested in securing the heritage of the Jewish people going forward. But it's not just one heritage. There's not just one way of doing it. There are lots of ways of doing it. And Hillel offers this menu, but what's fascinating to me is the menu isn't all filled in. So an undergraduate student, a freshman, could come in the door and say, I want to do X. And if there's some even tenuous link to Hillel, to Jewish life, to Jewish culture, I think that student will find an opportunity to get support. Not everything is going to survive, to thrive. But that's a real strong connection to me. The fact that we're in a community where Jews are the ordinary rather than the extraordinary, in some respects makes it, one could argue, less important to have Hillel. We don't have to be in an enclave. We don't have to be at the ramparts and protecting the community. But we need to establish that identity, to make that mark, to make our presence known, and to build this multicultural community. I think that's really very important. I think a Jewish student has an obligation at least to shop, and if not to buy, at Hillel. The good thing about being Jewish is you get a lot of holidays. And my wife tells the story that the standard definition of Jewish holidays, all Jewish holidays, is they tried to kill us, we won, let's eat. And so I would fall back on Passover, because Passover it's got the religious component. It's got the eating component, which is extraordinarily important. It's got the cultural, the family connection. So I have two mature children who have children of their own, and they're far away. And on a couple of occasions in the last few years, I've had the opportunity to have them with me at Passover. And that's been tremendously important. The Jewish value, the story value, the family value, really, it's something that I treasure. It's not the kind of burden, if you will, that some of the other holidays are. It's really, though what it celebrates is a frightening experience, it's a joyful experience to celebrate it. So for what it's worth, I have a married son that lives in Iowa, and in the last couple of years, I brought him to my Seder on Skype, which is a little crazy, and awkward, but it was really important for me to be in touch with him that way. If you're talking about technology, and particularly, I think you end up looking at social media, nobody should look at me for advice on that. I look at students for advice on that. I try to find out what they're doing and try to keep up. I think it's a matter of you need to be on the cutting edge. That's the way people communicate. So 10 years ago, I communicated with my students by email. And now I communicate with my students with Facebook or not Twitter yet, but I've actually done some work with that. I don't know what the next big thing is, but I think Hillel needs to be where the students are, and my expectation is that and my observation is that the students are at the cutting edge. If there was a way to do it, they figure out a way to do it. It's fascinating to me, and this is not a Hillel story so much as a Northwestern and an undergraduate student story. It's fascinating to me to walk down the street, at the main street of the campus on Sheridan Road, at class break time, when there are hundreds of students walking along, and they're all on the phone. And I try to listen to the conversations, and some students I'll talk to and ask them about that. And who are they talking to? They're talking to their mothers. They're talking to their fathers. What a great time this is. When I was a student, I wrote my mother a letter once a week, and she wrote me a letter in return once a week. And we made one phone call, and it was expensive, and everybody was anxious to hang up. And now everybody's connected. They're connected with their family, they're connected with their friends, and they're connected with Hillel. I think it's a grand time. One of the ways that I envision Hillel now, and to some extent in the future, is that there's this kind of broad stream of activity that go on under the umbrella of Hillel. And some of those things, some fall by the wayside because they don't work, and some kind of continue and they work great, but they go out of the bounds that a reasonable person might say, well, this is a logically Hillel activity and this is not. It strikes me that the challenge of the leadership here, particularly the executive director, but the student leadership as well, is to look at that stuff that's kind of moving out toward the edges and make decisions about, well, do you want to pull this back in, and do you want to put a little bit clearer Jewish stamp on that, or do you want to keep your hands off? I think running this organization, being on the board, being a student leader, being on the staff, it's a parental task in some respects. You know, we serve in the place of parents who might be doing something like what we're trying to do if students were back home. And I think a real challenge is to know when to put your hands on activities and when to keep your hands off. I think it's very hard to keep your hands off, but I think that's what's really brought this organization success in the last decade, is letting things happen, making things happen, and supporting the good things that do happen. So it's hard for me to see the future, but I suspect the future is going to be something like that. Go Cats!